Historically, immigrants have had to adapt to find a taste of home. When my mother lived in Germany in the 80s, she used to boil jalapenos in water because it was the closest she could get to the taste of kimchi stew. Sometimes, out of necessity, this melding of different cultures produces something entirely new and delicious. Growing up with a Korean mom and a white dad, my kitchen table was always a mashup of East and West. So when I heard about the concept of this show, to investigate the meaning of fusion and the impact of migration on culinary tradition, I knew I had to start with Korean food just because it's a cuisine that's so close to me. Pocha 32 in Manhattan's Koreatown serves a dish called Budae Jjigae, also known as army-based stew, that marries a Korean staple with Western ingredients. It's a dish that was born in a time of scarcity, in the aftermath of the Korean War, when Koreans began incorporating canned foods from American military bases.
This kind of processed food was very new to Koreans in the old days. Spam or canned food. Right after the Korean War is finished, everybody was poor. And then around that time, some people who work in the army base brought home this processed kind of canned spam and ham and sausage. And then they added it to their kimchi stew. And it tasted so tasty.
Even just visually is like a complete mashup of Korean and American ingredients.
When I was really young, I didn't know that this is Budae Jjigae. Like my mom would make kimchi jjigae, and then sometimes she'll throw in some ramen noodles, she'll throw in some sausages, some spam, and then it was later when people were like, oh, your mom's making Budae Jjigae, and I'm like, oh. My memory was mainly just, oh, it's kimchi jjigae with a lot of different ingredients.
Well, when I lived in Korea, I was not a big fan of this kind of Budae Jjigae because just the concept of this food, that adding sausage and ham, and cheese, I didn't like that kind of idea. Traditional army-based stew is you need the kimchi. First one, kimchi, you cannot skip it, and also spam. When I came to America and I lived in also Canada, everybody says, what? Koreans used to eat the spam, so I didn't realize that this is very, people look down on this kind of spam.
What I read was that the GIs had what they called C rations, and they were eating spam like 3 times a day. So back in America, there was this sort of backlash of just like, spam is disgusting, we've eaten it so much when we were in the military. But in Korea, people were on the brink of starvation, it was a war-torn country, agriculture was at a standstill. They were a lot of people were scavenging near army bases for this spam, so there's also like a very kind of painful history in this dish too.
More and more people love this Budae Jjigae among Koreans. But somebody who went through so poverty at the time, probably they would think, oh, wow, these days young people are eating this way. But actually, I was crying at the time. No food in Korea at the time. Most of the young generation don't think this way, just enjoy this food. Yeah. And also ingredients are now just improved, better quality. They add more rice cake here, tofu, sweet potato even, and noodles. They make it more kind of upscale. But only one thing you cannot miss is kimchi. So because it is based on kimchi stew.
I think that Korean people have like a really interesting relationship to fusion. A lot of Western ingredients, maybe because of this beginning of the history there, are becoming incorporated in new ways, and it's actually become more and more popular. So people are sort of attracted to fusion in the way that they kind of have this distaste for that here.
These days in Korea, a lot of people, we can't say, hey, you are Korean, you are supposed to eat only authentic food. Why kimchi jjigae, no Budae Jjigae? You can't say that because people love it. And maybe we can talk about, hey, more health conscious, don't eat too much processed food. We can talk about this, but this is not a Korean food. You are not supposed to eat this. We should, get out of that kind of a concept.
A lot of the chefs that I've talked to about their different types of cuisine are very hesitant about the word fusion. And I think that it kind of has this sort of negative connotation here. For me personally, when I hear of like an Asian fusion restaurant, I generally kind of turn my nose up a little bit because I just assume it's like inauthentic and bad.
I think that, fusion for me, when I liked to add sriracha to just a turkey sandwich, or I eat kimchi with pasta a lot. So is that really fusion? For me, more than a trend, I think it used to be more trendy, like, oh, let's combine this and it works. But I think that people love combining different things just, because it just tastes good.
It's interesting to think about like the difference between fusion and evolution. Now that there's such a larger Korean American population here, do you feel like Korean food has changed to sort of Western taste a little bit?
Just around me, everybody makes authentic food. But when I go to the restaurant, just like your restaurant, just maybe they can change because they have to be creative to bring that some more people. If this is too authentic ways, too spicy, too fishy, they probably calm down the heat. I understand.
One dish that I could think of that is from here that made it back to Korea and kind of came back is Korean fried chicken. When you go to Korean restaurants, I don't know if it's really always the right thing to say, like, oh, this is very traditional Korean fried chicken, because we're like, is that really authentic?
Well,
like it's hard to.
It's like saying that this is really authentic Budae Jjigae because it's like Korean fried chicken. I think similarly is also after the Korean War probably was also a Western influence. My mom passed away in 2014, almost 5 years ago now, and actually the first dish that I made was chachu. And I actually followed your recipe, that's how I found you. There are a lot of people who learn how to cook Korean food because of you. They all kind of have this like surrogate digital mom. It's a very like personal thing, this food, and learning how to pass that down, even if it's not from your family but someone else. That's why I think it kind of feels like so close to you, because there's this familial feeling of I learned how to cook this partially from this person. How do you feel when people who aren't Korean, who are interested in Korean food as like like there was a video about this white guy making kimchi, and a lot of people were like, this guy is just so confident in really not showing how to make it correctly. As someone who makes videos from a really kind of authentic place, how do you feel when you see something like that?
I mean, in the old days, when I started posting my recipe for the first time, I was very annoyed. For example, one chef came and then just cut it whole napa cabbage with a big knife to cut it like this. We don't do this. Always be nice to my ingredients.
They're your babies.
Yeah. And then when I saw this, I was very, some little bit annoyed. But these days it's okay, because all culture different. Whatever you make, you think that that's a kimchi. Okay, if this is tasty, that's your kimchi. So I think, for me, no problem. I always put myself into other people's position. If I want to learn Indian cooking, I want to learn real, authentic way. After that, okay, this is a too strong flavor. I can calm down, and that's my choice. But first, I want to learn real one.
What kind of questions I'm searching for the answer to also is, what is the distinction between cultural sharing and cultural appropriation? As a Korean business owner, serving food that has a very, very close personal connection to you, does it bother you to see financial success of non-Korean people using that cuisine as like a popular thing?
When we introduced our concept, the neighborhood and in the community, they were very open, which we're very grateful for. I'm not always there, so I don't know if the customers really know that this is owned by a Korean American. They just think, oh, is this like part of Whole Foods? We get that question a lot, like, oh, did Whole Foods create this concept? So when we talk and share about our story and why we're doing this, it's really to share the Korean authentic flavors, but just kind of reinterpret it in our way.
Do you ever worry, in the same way that we talked about Budae Jjigae and the history behind it, and this kind of fear that people think that this is authentic traditional Korean food, do you feel this like responsibility to tell people like this is an addition?
No, we love the traditional Korean soups and the proteins that our moms make, but at the same time, like, this is actually a lot of how Korean Americans eat. So I think
and also, do you ever feel just like, well, I'm Korean and I eat this, so it's authentic to me?
Yeah.
It irritates me a little bit more than I think like a slightly older generation. For me, and I wonder if you felt this way too growing up in the US, When I would bring kimchi to school, I got really made fun of. And it was a really like painful thing in my childhood to be made fun of. I was so self-conscious about it. Part of me is like very, very happy that Korean food is becoming more popular, that more people are exposed to it, but there's also like a little bit of resentment and irritation that it had to be sent around by like other, American people.
Right. You have like a different memory, like growing up, and you're like, now everybody loves it.
Right,
why didn't they like it 20 years ago?
Yeah,
Where were you
exactly.
like 10, 15 years ago? I grew up I have similar stories, and I think at one point I avoided trying to bring that Korean lunch to school, and sometimes I would just not eat. But I think that in general, people have changed the way they eat. They're introduced to so many more different flavors. Like, sushi is like a very popular example too. It took some time, but now that there's more access, there's better marketing, there's, more non-Koreans trying to create their own version of what it means to them and to share that part of their story, that now it's like, okay, I could eat it, you can eat it too. I think my memories, it's comfort food at home. My mom was a working mom, and this was like the fastest thing she could make. This had kind of all the food groups and a bowl of hot rice. You didn't need the 10 different banchan side dishes.
So I think this is a very good thing about Korean food. You can change the ingredients to something that you available.